When I was young, I lived in a world of dreams, of moods and myths and illusionary schemes. Though now I'm much more grown up, I fear that I must own up to the fact that I'm in doubt of what the modern cynics shout of. They say it's spring, this feeling light as a feather. They say this thing,
I guess we could bring that music down
this
just a little bit.
magic
So,
we share together.
And we also mentioned how at the beginning and the end of last show that the most revolutionary acts that we can do really is to, given the attention and that we're going to be under very soon, and we'll get into that a little later in Megatrends, is that we take care of ourselves psychologically and physically. This is Pat Fahey, your host of Megatrends on KXSF in San Francisco. That's on Wednesdays, and on Thursdays today here on Pacific Coast TV. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you tell your friends about it and have them listening in as well. Today we're going to have one of those revolutionary people working from the ground up, and I literally mean that. A guy who's a guerrilla gardener, Ron Finley, in Los Angeles, and he's using urban little every place where there's a little bit of earth, all of a sudden there are vegetables and flowers and such things growing. His greatest comment being, when children grow kale, they eat kale. But before we do get into that later on, I just wanted to get into some of the more, we'll get back to the XY axis. Since we had an intergenerational idiocracy really fail us, voting for a corrupt and really mindless convicted felon, 34 counts. He was already convicted of espionage on the Espionage Act, and he did that while he was not president. So even as president, the presidential immunity may be superseded. So, but a lot of things, a lot of very difficult, things are happening. The daily question arises every day, it seems, what next? What is today's most dangerous trend in U.S., oligarchy? And this week's answer is, one of the answers is the proliferation of detention centers owned by the private prison industry and some of the largest donors to Trump's campaign. The two largest private prison groups, Core Civic and Geo Group, have been awarded billion-dollar contracts to expand their holding capacity in more than a dozen locations around the country, and in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The New York Times reported this past week that, and I'm quoting from those, more detention spaces being created across the United States as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, it's ICE, seeks to ramp up operations under President Donald J. Trump. Now, if unchallenged, no one is safe, not journalists, not academics, not protesters or organizers of resistance to the Trump-Musk large-scale firings of government workers, of citizenship, ending citizenship, ending funding for poor students that provide food, medicine, therapy for poor students and their families, targeting immigrants, workers everywhere. But 70% of the farm labor force in red states is owned mostly by white farmers who voted for Trump, and they're gone. And they avoided to avoid ICE raids and detention in private prisons. So I want to bridge the private prison issue with that why at least a dozen states are going to go bankrupt in the next 2 months, and Trump voters are losing their jobs, their farms, their homes, their retirements, their security. I have to say, how do you spell Schadenfreude, you know? But suddenly they're screaming because they're being victimized by Trump-Musk chaos and learning too late that elections have consequences. So, and if SCOTUS goes along and everybody could face arrest and imprisonment in their regional private prison, owned by Trump donors, profits paid for by U.S. taxpayers themselves. So, and it gets worse than that because we're going to be talking about that. The question comes up, you know, what if the courts make, they put on TROs and PROs, temporary restraining orders, and then permanent restraining orders on that wide range of really devastating oligarchic things that harm U.S. citizens and harm immigrants, harm children, harm science, research and development. What if the courts give an order to cease and desist, and they just choose to ignore that? What if they just ignored that? What do the courts have for enforcement? And what they have for enforcement is the U.S. Marshal Service. And so what they would do if they violated that court order, it would be contempt of court, and they could send out, this is what the courts could do, both regional courts and the Supreme Court. Basically, once they make a decision, they defer to the district courts, and then they send out the U.S. Marshals. But what if the U.S. Marshals get a memo that says, stand down? What if Pam Bondi, who's the head of the Department of Justice, who has clearly shown that she's utterly incapable she's basically a Trump, an ass kisser, basically, and she was the one that tried to block the January 6th. I mean, she went along with Trump's lie that he won the election and so on. And that's who's head of the Department of Justice. What if the U.S. Marshals get a memo that says stand down? Then they're forced to make a decision or be fired, right? So we'll be talking more about that later. That we're maybe only days away from the complete breakdown of law and order, the rule of law in this country. So a classified national security chat involving top U.S. Top officials, by the way, also accidentally included Jeff Goldberg. You probably heard about the Signal chat, and we're going to have something from Zateo, and you'll be listening to Mehdi Hassan. We have a little recording of him and his friends talking about that. And so the real question is, Jeffrey Goldberg was the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and he was discussing Houthis and military plans. He was invited to the group chat. So this incident occurred when the National Security Council shared secret war plans in a group chat, which included operational details related to the conflict in Yemen. What conflict? U.S. bombing of Yemen. We're talking about the U.S. bombing, just indiscriminate public bombing citizens. That's been in the news. But this whole, none of the story extended that far, about, they talked about on the group chat about these military details, but did they talk about, Goldberg expressed disbelief upon realizing he was part of the conversation and highlighting the accidental nature of the leak, but missing from this story was how lucky U.S. citizens were to get that public intel. And for once, the U.S. public, usually non-informed or deliberately misinformed about U.S. policy in the Middle East, now has been provided the intel necessary to ask a much bigger question. Why is the U.S. bombing the Houthis? Why is the U.S. bombing one of the poorest countries on earth, Yemen? And the answer is that the UC's made it very plain why they are attacking ships in the Red Sea. That's why they claim they're doing that. They're carrying weapons to Israel to kill civilian populations in Gaza. And we bomb the Houthis for doing what U.S. foreign policy should be doing, sending the message to Israel to stop the Gaza genocide. Houthis stop attacking ships in the Red Sea when ships containing the weapon shipments to Israel to kill Gaza's civilian populations is halted. Consequence, they're getting their civilian populations are being bombed by the U.S. indiscriminately. I mean, completely unconstitutionally. President Trump did not consult Congress. It's against international law. They're bombing civilian populations indiscriminately. Some of those details were exposed by the so-called security breach. So those are the larger salient facts that are not being brought to you by, well, there's some press that's getting out there about this, but Megatrends is here for you to do that. So also next week, I'll have a review of Haven for Hope in San Antonio. That's the 22-acre campus that has reduced homelessness by 80% in that region and has a 91% transformation rate for people who go into, that facility, and they get off of drugs and alcohol and they get their lives back together, and they're able to get off. And they even have homeless prevention as an added dimension, something that operationally San Francisco could use information about. They seem somehow reluctant to send a delegation there, but I'm going to be, Megatrends, your host, Pat Fay, he's going to be there next week to do that precisely that. So I'm going to be there. And they have a long track record of success as an urban homeless operation. And hopefully and it would, the mayor, Daniel Levin, ran on that, to help solve homelessness and help the unhoused regain stability and hope systematically, do better case management and across the spectrum of case management. So I'll be there next week for a tour of the Haven for Hope campus. And plus it'll be a live call into Megatrends from Haven for Hope next week to KXSF. And that's going to KXSF.FM. And that's going to be between typically 12 to 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. And the call will be at exactly 1 o'clock. So if you want to hear a live feed right from Haven for Hope, and just tune in to KXSF.FM on next Wednesday, April 2nd. And so by the way, back to this message app called Signal, where plans for American airstrikes on Houthi militant groups in Yemen were discussed. Absent of whatever else I told you here, the Pentagon referred Newsweek to the National Security Council and asked for comment on the apparent security lapse. The National Security Council did not immediately respond to a request for comment, of course, but a spokesperson for the agency previously confirmed to Goldberg the Signal group chat appeared to be an authentic message chain. And so this is actually from a Newsweek, and Newsweek has this interesting format of telling you the basic story, and then they say why it matters, and then subsequently what to know, and then what to do next. And so that's that full format. So the why it matters. A wave of U.S. airstrikes hit Houthi targets on March 15th, killing 53 people, according to Yemen's health ministry, which is run by the group. And additional airstrikes followed in the subsequent days. Now, and who were the targets? Well, one of the targets was a wedding. Another one was a funeral. There were open markets. there was civilian populations. So that's our tax money at work right now. And I think we have a duty to not only work against oligarchy in the United States, also against indiscriminate use of our tax dollars to fund the U.S. military to bomb civilian populations somewhere else. So details of U.S. military operations are not supposed to be conducted over publicly available platforms such as Signal, and a number of security experts have said that a chat group could have violated the Espionage Act. So ahead of the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump focused heavily on Democratic rival Hillary Clinton's use of private email service, you might recall, for official business as a security of state. So it's just, the hypocrisy is just through the roof. So what to know? Newsweek has reproduced all the Signal Group messages that were published by The Atlantic, and feel free to read those, and either by being written out by Goldberg or included in the article as screenshots. So it's unclear what proportion of the message The Atlantic chose to make public, and some details were kept secret for security reasons. So, and it's interesting how Pete Hegseth, the utterly, laughably incompetent former Fox, nonsense noisemaker, and now, what is he, head of the? It's hard to believe, head of the Defense Department. I mean, he reacted to the story of the war plan leaks. White House National Security Advisor Michael Waltz also said, team established the principal group for coordinating on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. I'm quoting from the actual text that was publicly revealed. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a tiger team of deputy agency chief staff level, following up from the meeting in the Situation Room this morning for action items that we'll be sending it out later this evening. Please provide the best staff from your team for us to coordinate, et cetera, et cetera. So, when I asked ChatGPT about this, it was really, I gave him the sort of salient details, and it said that the recent accidental inclusion of journalist Jeffrey Goldberg in classified National Security Council chat has shed light on U.S. military operations against Yemen's Houthi rebels. This incident's raised significant questions regarding the motivations behind U.S. actions in the Houthis' attack in the Red Sea and the broader implications for Israeli-Palestinian conflict. U.S. military actions against the Houthis, again, this is ChatGPT I'm quoting from. The U.S. has intensified airstrikes against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. They claim it's Iran-backed. These strikes aim to protect American assets, ensure freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, and counter the Houthis' threat to international shipping. So President Trump, this is the story. So President Trump stated that these actions are also intended to send a message to Iran to cease its support for the Houthis. Like, that's really going to happen, right? So AP News, and the New York Post, and the Atlantic, and those were the sources. And the Houthis have launched attacks on ships in the Red Sea, claiming to target. They're targeting vessels linked to Israel that are sending, armed shipments there. And so, they assert that these actions are in solidarity with the Palestinians and aim to pressure Israel to allow aid and food and supplies into Gaza, which they stopped. And then recently, Netanyahu ordered breaking the ceasefire. So the escalation involving the U.S. and the Houthis occurred amid a renewed violence between Israel and Hamas after Israel resumed the military operations in Gaza. So it's leading to over 400 people killed, and mostly women and children. Just, so there's only there's 2 countries on Earth that are involved in that, and the rest of the countries on Earth are. It's a universal international condemnation, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that the strikes are just the beginning, following a collapse of the ceasefire. So that was from Al Jazeera, and so, like I was saying earlier, the accidental leak involving Jeffrey Goldberg brought these issues to the forefront, prompting discussions about U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. While some media outlets have reported on the specifics of the leak and the subsequent military actions, a broader debate about the rationale behind U.S. involvement and its alignment with public interest are less prominent. And international sources such as Al Jazeera and Haaretz. Haaretz is the moderate liberal so-called newspaper in Israel, and have Al Jazeera and Haaretz and Die Tageszeitung in Germany and other newspapers internationally have provided coverage on these developments, offering a diverse perspectives on the motivations and implications. And much deeper and more complex than we're getting in the United States by and large. So, the complex interplay between U.S. military actions, Houthi attacks, and Israeli-Palestinian conflicts underscores the much more intricate dynamic of Middle East geopolitics. And I think that's what Megatrends is doing. That's a megatrend that we're bringing to you today. So I hope that you appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in, by the way, today. And anyway, so I wanted to get to, and we should appreciate, by the way, I urge people, if you're listening into Megatrends today, to Google Haaretz, Haaretz, and Al Jazeera, Al, and then Jazeera, for their more extensive, and intricate, subtle coverage of this escalating tensions that are going on there. Remember, it's our tax money that's doing this, and I think we have a duty to say, you know what, that's not what I signed up for. It's not why I pay taxes. So, one last thing is that Al Jazeera detailed the Houthis' ultimatum, giving Israel 4 days to lift the blockade and allow aid into Israel, and threatening to resume naval attacks if their demands weren't met. And so that's what's, so frankly, let's give it up for the Houthis. They don't have to do this. They have, they're doing this for principled reasons. I think for the right reasons. It's not like they're killing anybody. They're just boarding ships, and they're preventing ships with arms from getting through the Red Sea, which is the critical pathway for arms shipments to Israel. Anyway, I guess I wanted to move to the first video, and we're going to do this. This video is really, really interesting. I hope you appreciate this person. She's done many of them, and she does a very good analysis of the present state in the United States. Let's hear this megatrend on Megatrends now.
This country is going to go through a revolution for the next 10 years. And I know to say this out loud sounds really alarmist at this time, but I think it's just better for us to be prepared psychologically that this is not business as usual times. We're all going to want to be really angry about what's going on in our country. And that's really natural. Dr. King has a quote that says, "Violence is the language of the unheard." But anger and rage and protests in the streets where we're getting tear gassed, that is not something you do for 10 years. That'll burn you out real quickly. 10 years is a marathon. I've been spending a lot of time with our history recently, and I've been reading books written by our revolutionaries from the 1960s. And what they say is the revolution happens through joy. The revolution happens through music and through rest and through sustainability. And so I want to call you to design your revolution in a way that is super sustainable for you. That anger that you feel, its true job is to help you get through the fear that's always keeping you from making any changes. And in the revolution, you're going to be asked to choose your fear or choose your faith. Do you want to trust fall and believe that we can create something better? Or do you want to let the outside powers say, if you just do what we tell you to do, we'll keep you safe? So use your anger to help you overcome your fear and then create joy. This revolution is going to be very different than our revolution of the 1960s, because in the 1960s, a lot of people had money and good jobs, and the system was working for more people. We're not going to have to convince people that they should join the revolution. They are already going to be home, unemployed, with nothing to do. And we will simply invite those people to our dinner tables, invite them to our gatherings. Though the next 10 years may be uncomfortable and different, I think they're going to feel better because they're going to be an experience of empowerment. We are part of the generation that is saying goodbye to capitalism as a system. As the US collapses into revolution, it is going to be a sign of failed capitalism on the world stage, because this has been the place of unfettered neoliberal capitalism. It's been quite an experiment. And the world will look around with its exported capitalism and say, maybe this is not such a good system. Capitalism needs us to survive. And so this revolution is going to be, and I've said it before, one of quiet quitting. Just go home and rest. Stop upholding the system for them. They need you. We're not going to have to be out in the streets getting tear gassed. We will be home, not working our hourly jobs for capitalism, and we'll be on Zoom groups creating ideas for our own decentralized food system and our own decentralized social media. The period of the next 10 years is going to be about us taking care of ourselves, because the central governments are not going to be able to take care of us. Decentralized, small groups of people, probably related to your local area. Those groups coming together to work together, to trade things. It's not all going to collapse at once. So we will be able to shift with the tide as things change slowly. But I want you to remember this is a marathon. So be in your joy. Create this sustainably. This country is going to go through a revolution for the next 10 years. And
all right. So that so to follow up on that, we wanted to go to what does it mean sustainability. In other words, I had dinner with some friends this weekend, and I basically we're all political activists. We've been really worried about the future. The grandchildren and children of the people I was with were, they're worried about their futures, and they. But one of the things we just decided was that, hey, there's a lot of anxiety that we've been going under. Let's do something let's make food together and eat together, and let's make sure we're encouraging each other to stay out of psychological trouble and support each other psychologically, and get our sleep and do things that are healthy, because it's going to be a long haul. Now, I want to say something before we get to that movie, that second video. And about this guy, the key person there is Ron Finley. I want you to know his name, Ron Finley. You'll really get it. great a kick out of what he said, but I wanted to answer Pete Buttigieg. Maybe many of you saw on Pete Buttigieg on Facebook, and he's been all over the internet with his posting, which reiterated the story that we already had finished reading ourselves, about the security breach. And I was listening to him, and I was saying, okay, come on, Pete, and don't just tell us what we've already know but it ended up with an utterly weak, we got to do better. So, and he completely missed the bigger story, the security breach exposing the raison d'etre of the Houthis' attack on ships, the reason for doing what they're doing in the Red Sea, that are sending weapons to Israel. He just nothing. He just talked about himself and how he was a security guy in Iraq, and this is how security goes, and this was terrible. He was really but nothing about how the Houthis' actions exposed the complicity of the U.S. in protecting Israel's genocide in Israel. Nothing. So it was really disappointing. If Israel ends Gaza's genocide and stops blocking food, medicine, and supplies into Gaza, the Houthis stop attacking. That was the golden opportunity provided by this security breach. And so normally, a normally functioning Congress, we just don't have one. National security, what's that? We were lucky to get that public intel. Like I said before, for once, the U.S. public, usually misinformed about U.S. policy in the Middle East, knows the intel to ask the bigger question: why is the U.S. bombing the Houthis and bombing civilian populations indiscriminately without consulting Congress, in violation of international law, in violation of the U.S. Constitution? These guys in Washington are out of control. There are no rules, and we'll get to more about that later. And then Pete Buttigieg's parting shot was, after telling us what we saw already, none of that analysis at all. He just ends up, we got to do better. That's it. Pete, come on, Pete Buttigieg. Such a Democrat, such a feckless Democrat, and I love Pete Buttigieg. Don't get me wrong. That's what I thought. We got to get Pete to, open up a little harder on that, and Pete, you got to do better. So let's play this next one. This is guerrilla gardening, happening in Los Angeles and now all around the country. This is how we will proliferate in the next 3.5 years.
Just like 26.5 million other Americans, I live in a food desert. South Central Los Angeles. Liquor stores, fast food, vacant lots. Home of the drive-through and the drive-by. Funny thing is, the drive-throughs are killing more people than the drive-bys. People are dying from curable diseases in South Central Los Angeles. For instance, the obesity rate in my neighborhood is like 5 times higher than, say, Beverly Hills, which is like probably 8-10 miles away. I got tired of seeing this happening. And I wonder, how would you feel if you had no access to healthy food? If every time you walk out your door, you see the ill effects that the present food system have on your neighborhood? I see wheelchairs bought and sold like used cars. I see dialysis centers popping up like Starbucks. And I figured this has to stop. So what I did, I planted a food forest in front of my house. It's on a strip of land that we call a parkway. It's like 150 feet by like 10 feet. The thing is, it's owned by the city, but you have to maintain it. So I'm like, cool. I do whatever the hell I want. Since it's my responsibility and I got to maintain it, and this is how I decided to maintain it. So me and my group, LA Green Grounds, we got together and we started planting my food forest, fruit trees, the whole nine, for vegetables. What we do, we're a pay-it-forward kind of group, where it's composed of like gardeners from all walks of life from all over the city, and it's completely volunteer, and everything we do is free. And in the garden, it was beautiful. I have a legacy in South Central. I grew up there. I raised my sons there, and I refuse to be a part of this manufactured reality that was manufactured for me by some other people, and I manufactured my own reality. See, I'm an artist. Gardening is my graffiti. I grow my art. Just like a graffiti artist, where they beautify walls, I beautify lawns, parkways. I use the garden, the soil, like it's a piece of cloth, and the plants and the trees, that's my embellishment for that cloth. So what happened? I have witnessed my garden become a tool for the education, a tool for the transformation of my neighborhood. To change the community, you have to change the composition of the soil. We are the soil. You'd be surprised how kids are affected by this. Gardening is the most therapeutic and defiant act you can do, especially in the inner city. Plus, you get strawberries. And people ask me, Finn, aren't you afraid people are going to steal your food? And I'm like, hell no, I ain't afraid they're going to steal it. That's why it's on the street. That's the whole idea. I want them to take it, but in the same time, I want them to take back their health. So Green Grounds has gone on to plant maybe like 20 gardens. We've had like 50 people come to our dig-ins and participate, and it's all volunteers. If kids grow kale, kids eat kale. If they grow tomatoes, they eat tomatoes. But when none of this is presented to them, if they're not shown how food affects the mind and the body, they blindly eat whatever the hell you put in front of them. I see young people, and they want to work, but they're in this thing where they're caught up. I see kids of color, and they just on this track that's designed for them that leads them to nowhere. So with gardening, I see an opportunity where we can train these kids to take over their communities, to have a sustainable life. And when we do this, who knows? We might produce the next George Washington Carver. But if we don't change the composition of the soil, we will never do this. Now, this is one of my plans. This is what I want to do. I want to plant a whole block of gardens where people can share in the food in the same block. I want to take shipping containers and turn them into healthy cafes. And now don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about no free shit, because free is not sustainable. The funny thing about sustainability, you have to sustain it. What I'm talking about is putting people to work and getting kids off the street and letting them know the joy, the pride, and the honor in growing your own food. Opening farmers markets. So what I want to do here, we got to make this sexy. So I want us all to become ecolutionary, renegades, gangsters, gangster gardeners. We got to we got to flip the script on what a gangster is. If you ain't a gardener, you ain't gangster. Get gangster with your shovel, okay? And let that be your weapon of choice.
That's Ron Finley, a gangster gardener. And you too can be a gangster gardener in the city or in the suburbs, or where there's a food desert. And so what an imaginative solution. So Google Ron Finley and see what he's doing. Maybe go down and visit him and send him a donation to his organization. This next video is on by one named Tracy Goodman, whose dad worked for the National Institute of Health and the World Health Organization. And this is the topic about the defunding of research and development. And let's hear what she has to say.
Scientists and researchers are not okay right now. Is anyone reporting on what happened yesterday at a research conference in Orlando, Florida? I don't think the media is telling us what's happening, so I'm going to share the information here. I got a series of texts yesterday from a former student of mine explaining what happened at a research conference that her brother was attending pertaining to issues regarding hearing. Let me read you what she said. My brother has been at an NIH conference, that's the National Institute of Health, for neuroscience, and a lot of the auditory research events were canceled because it's considered DEI. Some of the residents of the hotel wearing MAGA hats trashed posters because it was a talk about the diversity of afferent firing in the cochlea. They just saw the word diversity and thought it was DEI. Do we understand what that means? Diversity of afferent firing in the cochlea. We're talking about the different ways that nerves are firing in the inner ear. People think that's DEI. Many of my brother's colleagues are getting messages that their funding is getting pulled even though it was already earned. And this is just one example of an entire field being dismantled. I'm sure you're hearing about plenty of others. I am not hearing about plenty of others. He said the conference is like a funeral for the field. People have just been crying all over the hotel. It's maybe one of the most stressful times for him and his colleagues. Basically, all conference long, he's been finding out all of his postdoc opportunities have been evaporated. The NIH members who make up most of the committee couldn't attend, and neither could anybody else from the NIH. And this is because, quote, the new administration imposed a blackout on the NIH and other health agencies on most communications with the outside world and banned travel, forcing the cancellation of meetings needed for decisions about what research to fund next in the fight against cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other diseases. This is so big, you guys. This is everything connected to our freedom of speech and the communication of unbiased research, and it is crumbling in front of us. We need to use this platform to spread the word while we still can. American scientists and researchers are not okay right now. Is anyone reporting on what happened yesterday at a...
So they got attacked by MAGA morons. And how moronic are they? They saw the word diversity because they couldn't understand they did that diversity of afferent auditory capacity. Hearing, meaning that hearing requires multiple vectors that are involved in physically and mentally, for hearing. The same thing is true for vision, and but that's unfortunately where we're at. And so we really are, and at the same time, those are the very folks who don't see it coming. They don't see the hammer is going to drop on them as well, and then they're going to come crying. So when they lose their jobs, and they lose their businesses, and they lose their homes, and they lose their health care, and they use their security. Anyways, turning the page. By the way, thank you for listening. I'm sort of take a deep breath because there's an awful lot going on in a lot of megatrends. We have about 17 minutes left, and that amount of time, I wanted to make sure that we also got a little bit of feedback, from, well, actually some information about it. Let's go back to 2021. The question is, one that I brought up last week is that could, Trump be charged with espionage? He has already been charged with espionage when he retained classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Was asked to return them, refused to, and the Justice Department had to go in and send in the U.S. Marshals to on court order to gather those documents, and then it was discovered that he allowed classified documents to be seen by a number of foreign entities, only some of whose identities are known. So his retention of those classified documents has lots of constitutional illegalities. The worst was exposing dozens of Chinese CIA operatives, working on, and all of those operatives were tortured and killed. And they were, those are the consequences. Those are the and that was part of the charges by Jack Smith that included espionage, a clear violation of the Espionage Act. And as of the last, I think November, or actually October, or actually November, he was forced to drop those, at least temporarily. Not that they couldn't be revisited, but again, those are violations he did when he was not president, and they do not fall under presidential immunity. However, the likelihood of this Justice Department, pursuing those under Pam Bondi are unlikely. So we have to consider that timeline. Okay. Right. Now the status quo of enforcement of temporary restraining orders and restraining orders in general by the courts over Trump's U.S. citizenship, ending U.S. citizenship, protection of personal data and publishing it on the internet, that Trump and Musk are contemplating, to prosecuting FBI agents who have investigated January 6th thugs, and many, many more things. Now Trump's going to lose some of these cases, but what happens then? Could we be within days of a complete abandonment of the rule of law? I mean, this is psychopathology. And psychopaths don't care about laws or obeying rules. His Musk minions that are going around to computer sites and getting access to public data, they don't care about the rule of law either. So what happens when courts order them to cease and desist? What happens when the courts impose restraining orders and say that they cannot move forward on these horrific policies involving redefining U.S. citizenship and other things, and picking up immigrants, people who are U.S. citizens, and then putting them in jails? Ultimately, if that continues to go down, anyone is vulnerable. Anyone. You and I are vulnerable because of the arbitrariness. So ultimately, the U.S. Marshals are the ultimate enforcement mechanism for the courts. But what if they get a memo from Pam Bondi or Truth telling them to stand down, or that they will be fired? They're faced with that. So, like a federal judge renders a decision, thou shalt not do X. So someone is enjoined and they say, F you, I'm going to do it anyway. So the judge can then call on the U.S. Marshals to arrest person Y for violating a violation of X in a court order and bring them in and hold them in contempt of court. The problem is that all of the mechanisms that federal judges have to enforce their orders go through the executive branch. Let that sink in for a second. The U.S. Marshal Service, which goes out and executes warrants, would take someone in contempt. They would take them into custody and hold them in contempt. That's part of the U.S. Department of Justice, that whole mechanism. And the Department of Justice reports to Donald J. Trump. What happens when Trump decides to ignore the rule of law or any court order? What happens when he tells Pam Bondi to tell the U.S. Marshal Service to stand down? What then? In that case, what good is a federal court order? Once you get to that point, there is no law, and we're in a completely new territory. So there's going to take a diversity of forces, people on the streets in every local jurisdiction, blockading prisons, making noise. But imagine that no court order can be enforced by, at that point, why should anybody obey the law? Why should you and I pay taxes? There won't be anyone to comply with, with the law. I mean, is the government going to come after us for not paying taxes? And who's going to do that? We are on the edge of a dark precipice, and I wanted to make sure the Megatrends listening audience, tell your friends, tell them to come back and listen to Megatrends in future weeks. This is really dangerous stuff. Look for that in the press. Don't just look for in the U.S. press. Don't look, for Rachel Maddow to bail us out, right? But she's doing some good things. That's absolutely the case. So we're talking about psychopaths and sociopaths, people with no morals, no conscience, no nothing. Why are we going to obey a court order? Of course, cannot enforce their orders. We're in a dark new constitutional world we've never faced in this country. So I want to make sure that was brought to people's attention. So let's go to this fourth video. This is one. We'll come back with about a minute or so to go. This is from Zateo and Pete Buttigieg and his friends.
Mehdi Hassan is the founder of Zateo, journalist, author. He's wearing the Zateo hoodie. People asked him to wear it.
I'm not wearing a Zateo hoodie.
Buy the Zateo hoodie.
Oh, it's press hoodie.
In
the press
to
one.
Hossam
Okay.
Shabat and Mahmoud Mansour, who were killed this week.
In honor of our colleagues, I call them colleagues, Palestinian colleagues who were killed by Israel for trying to cover the genocide. Here is finally a response from someone from the Trump administration, Mike Waltz, the individual who allegedly set up this unsecure signal chat and pretty much brought on everyone, including Jeffrey Goldberg and God knows who else, to find out about the strikes on the Houthis. This is what he said on Fox as of about 30 minutes ago.
How did a Trump-hating editor of The Atlantic end up on your signal chat? Laura, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but of all the people out there, somehow this guy who has lied about the president, who has lied to Gold Star families, lied to their attorneys, and gone to Russia hoax, gone to just all kinds of lengths to lie and smear the president of the United States. And he's the one that somehow gets on somebody's contact and then gets sucked into this group.
Allah says in the Quran, and they give food in spite of their love for it to the needy, the orphans, and the ones in captive. This is an
Do you see the guy? Okay, can I just say mine? You ever see that great clip? It's on the Netflix comedy series where it's the guy, I'm forgetting the comedian's name. He's hilarious. He's the guy in the hot dog suit driving the hot dog car through the window, and he goes, "All right, guys, who did it? It was you."
We're all trying to find the guy
who did this. It is. I love the lack of agency. He was sucked into this group by what, a vacuum cleaner? Like, what are you talking about? Sucked, like, Jeffrey Goldberg getting dragged into the signal group. You invited him, right? And what's so interesting about this is that Mike Waltz was clearly had a relationship with Jeffrey Goldberg before. Maybe he was briefing against him. Maybe that's what he's so shit scared about, that Trump is going to can his ass when he realizes that Michael Waltz was actually talking to Jeffrey Goldberg as a source and giving him information. Because that's why Jeffrey Goldberg is in his phone as JG, and that's why he invites him instead of another JG. As someone pointed out on social media today, guys, I don't know if you saw it. Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg is such a horrible guy. Why'd you invite him to a group chat? Like, it doesn't make any sense. If he's that bad, why is he in the group chat?
Well, that's the other question. I mean, I think that, I think it's great that Jeffrey Goldberg is actually coming forward. I hope he releases more information. But yeah, why was he in, Michael Waltz's, his...
Again, undermines any self-defense or international law argument that we need to do this because the Houthis are hitting our ships. The guy says it. We can wait 30 days. So I think Rashida Tlaib put it well yesterday on Twitter when she said there's more anger about the group chat than about what they were discussing and doing in the group chat. The actual bombing of Yemen, let's not forget that. Like, I know everyone in DC is rightly, in uproar about the chat, but not everyone in DC is angry about the bombing of the Houthis, because unfortunately we have this foreign policy blob in DC which supports bipartisan bombing Middle East countries and thinking that's going to help the world. And I think we should remind ourselves it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, and Trump, the great anti-war guy, apparently is doing it.
And they also hit Biden in their chat when Biden actually also bombed Houthis in Yemen. Who knows? Arguably, maybe more strategic. We do know that 5 children were killed among 53 who were killed. But sticking on that point, I don't know if you saw J.D. Vance had a little bit of a disagreement, but he was willing to give it to the chat. If, the chat agreed that we should do it now, that's fine. But, it might affect oil prices and we don't want to do that. And it's kind of more European trading routes. He said there's a risk to moderate severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep the concerns to myself. There's a strong argument in delaying it a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, et cetera. In other words, prepping a little bit more for this. Mehdi, what do you make of that?
It's just a reminder that J.D. Vance right now is probably the most anti-European American politician of our generation. Like, his reason for not hitting the Houthis is it might help Europe, and we don't want to help Europe. It helps their shipping, not ours. And Europe's lame, and Europe loses. Like, he went to Europe, he lectured them in a speech, he attacked Zelensky in the Oval Office. Now you see him in a private chat. The guy has some serious issues.
Yeah.
And Tucker Carlson recently was having a discussion on the radio on his show where it was classic Tucker, he caged it. I want to be careful how I just paraphrase. But there was an argument about whether Tucker Carlson was suggesting that the wrong side won World War II.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at J.D. Vance, you've got to ask similar questions. He's so mad about Western Europe and so soft on Putin and Russia. And as we know, the AfD, who he met with allegedly in Germany, that you got to wonder, is J.D. Vance one of these American Christian conservatives who thinks, well, maybe the West shouldn't have won World War II? I don't know.
Right,
but he has a weird pathological obsession and hatred with Europe to the point where even J.D. Vance, the vaguely anti-war guy in the group chat, is not anti-war on principle or for the sake of the Constitution. It's to stick it to the Europeans.
And listen to what we have. So far, the response we've had so far, Pete Hegseth seems to have blatantly lied and contradicted the NSC.
And
then
Caroline
we had just about an hour ago, Waltz is the hot dog man with the hot dog vehicle who crashes through the store and says, who crushed the hot dog vehicle? I think it was Jeffrey Goldberg, not me, wearing the hot dog
she should have just said, it's Laura Ingraham, but it's like, let me see your phone.
And then we have.
All right, so that was one of the key little nuggets in there was the question of maybe the wrong person won World War II. Only J.D. Vance and Tucker Carlson could entertain such an incredible thought. But anyway, I just wanted to, the last couple of minutes, summarize what we've been talking today, because we're talking about we're going to be going through a very difficult period, and things are going to be happening pretty fast, and it's very important for people to pay attention. We're going to be under a lot of stress, so again, it's important to get our sleep. And do I have that closing song? Yeah, okay, let's bring that up just a little bit. And of course, we always enter and exit with the Moon song. I want to sort of reach out and say thanks to Ron Finley, for his work as a guerrilla gardener in Los Angeles, and also Tracy Goodman talking about what's happening with science and research and development these days. And a lot of my friends who are themselves PhDs, and they have students that are in graduate students and so on. A lot of their research is really uncertain of where they're going to be. And so they're some of them are maybe going to become homeless or something. And there's a lot of stress in the chaos that's going on in the world right now, but in the United States. So I urge us to I want to begin and end with the most revolutionary act that we can do, which is to keep ourselves healthy in this stressful times, because we have a lot to do. We really want to be very active calling our congressmen, being out, on the streets, connecting with the resistance websites, and getting your rest and eating well, and staying in touch with people who have a vision that democracy is a participatory activity. It can't be done without us participating in it. Democracy happens because we make it happen. Thanks for listening to Megatrends, and we'll see you next week. And I'll be I'll be at Haven for Hope at San Antonio, Texas. And I'll give you the report of that when I get back. Okay? Thank you very much.